When rising tech mogul Cameron Blake reconnects with Alina Carter, the woman who once saved his life, he doesn't expect her to be carrying his child. She's not part of his carefully curated world. She's honest, grounded, and fiercely independent. And she's the one thing his wealth can't buy. For Elena, navigating motherhood was already overwhelming. Now, facing it with a man who lives in boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, her heart is caught between fear and the echo of that one unforgettable night. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I love hearing from you. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt romance, one life at a time. It started with a heartbeat she wasn't expecting. Alina Carter sat in the dimly lit exam room, the familiar scent of antiseptic clinging to her scrubs, even though she was the patient today, not the technician. The monitor hummed beside her, and there, clear as a whisper, was the rhythmic flicker of life on the screen. She was pregnant. 7 weeks. Heart flutter strong, no mistaking it now. Her hand pressed gently against her flat abdomen, as if she could feel the tiny spark already shifting the axis of her world. She should have been panicked. Or maybe angry. But mostly, she felt hollowed out by disbelief, and somewhere beneath that, a rising tide of awe. 3 months ago, she'd made a mistake, or maybe a memory. Cameron Blake. One reckless night, a fundraiser gala, the rooftop, the way he'd looked at her like he was afraid she might disappear if he blinked. And then, him, gone again before sunrise. Just like his life. Private jets, business meetings, global spotlights, and tech articles that called him the next Musk with better hair. This. She stared at the ultrasound printout the nurse had handed her and felt time fold in on itself. Cameron Blake hated hospitals. The corridors felt too sterile, too still, like silence was something enforced, not invited. He adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit as he stood near the entrance of the radiology department, eyes scanning the digital wall poster promoting the hospital's annual gala. Keynote speaker Cameron Blake, CEO of Aon Technologies, shaping tomorrow's health today, his mouth curved into a tight, hollow smile, PR fluff. His assistant Margot had insisted he say yes to the invitation. It would boost the company's reputation ahead of their next investor round. Cameron hated pretending he still had time to believe in causes, but this hospital was different. It was the same place he'd been brought after the crash 3 years ago. The same place she had pulled him from wreckage and refused to let him die. He hadn't forgotten her. Not for a moment. Alina Carter. She'd haunted him in memory, in dreams. Then by chance or fate, they'd cross paths again at the last gala. That night had undone him. Her laugh had felt like warmth in his otherwise glass-walled life. Her touch like truth. He'd left before dawn, not out of cruelty, but because he'd been afraid. Because staying would have required more than he could give. Now he was back here, and he would see her tonight. He knew it without needing confirmation. It was a hospital gala. She worked here. If he was lucky, they'd make eye contact across a crowded room, maybe share a polite smile and move on. But Cameron had never been lucky. Elena slid on her favorite navy dress, the one that didn't hug too tightly. Her curves were already changing slightly, and she wasn't ready to explain anything yet. She pulled her curls into a soft chignon, dabbed on a little gloss, and paused at the mirror. "You can do this," she murmured to her reflection. The gala was a formality, just her showing face to support the hospital where she'd built a steady, if quiet, career. But this year, Cameron was speaking. She'd found out after she'd confirmed attendance. Too late to back out. Still, she'd told herself she could handle it. She'd see him, exchange pleasantries, walk away. Her life wasn't a soap opera. It was science, scheduling, and getting enough sleep. But then she stepped into the grand ballroom and all her logical defenses fell apart. He was already there. Talking to donors, a low-ball glass in his hand, perfectly disheveled in a way only the absurdly wealthy ever were. And then, as if pulled by gravity, his eyes lifted, found hers. Locked. Time stuttered. "Elena," he said, and the crowd blurred around them. She nodded. "Cameron." He stepped closer, the scent of cedar and expensive whiskey wrapped in warmth. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I work here. You're the guest," she replied, cool but not cruel. There was a flicker of something across his face. Was it guilt? "Can we talk?" he asked. And though everything in her said run, her heart whispered stay. She nodded. They found an alcove off the main ballroom, the low hum of jazz trailing behind them. "How have you been?" he asked, voice quieter now. Vulnerable. She crossed her arms. "Fine. Busy." His gaze lingered on her, more observant than she wanted. "You look good. That's not why I agreed to talk." Cameron inhaled deeply. "You deserve an apology for how I left that night." Elena blinked, surprised. "You don't owe me anything." "I do. That night it meant more to me than it should have, and that scared the hell out of me." A pause. She looked at him fully now. "Why?" He didn't answer right away, just pressed his thumb to the inside of his palm, a gesture she'd noticed before when he was bracing himself. "I've spent so long being the guy with a plan, every hour accounted for, every risk calculated. But you were the one variable I couldn't account for. You mattered. That terrified me." She didn't speak, not yet, just looked at him. This man who commanded boardrooms but stood here like he didn't know how to ask for a second chance. "Cameron," she said slowly, "I didn't ask you to stay. I knew who you were. I knew the rules. But I didn't want to be that guy," he whispered. "Not with you." And then, against all her instincts, Elena reached into her clutch, pulled out the ultrasound printout, held it between them. "This is yours too," she said. His hand shook as he took it. One look, and the breath left him. Is this real?" 7 weeks. Strong heartbeat. He stared at the tiny blur, eyes clouding. His voice broke on the next words. "I'm going to be a father." Elena nodded. And just like that, the world tilted again. For both of them. He didn't hear the clinking of champagne glasses or the lull of jazz from the quartet anymore. All he could hear was the memory of a heartbeat. The ultrasound image trembled slightly in his hand. Not because the ballroom was cold, but because his grip was unsteady. His entire foundation was. A baby. Their baby. His first instinct, the one burned into him by years of boardrooms and bad press, was to protect. The second was harder. It came with no guidebook or scalable pitch deck. It was simply wanting to stay. Cameron looked up, finding Elena's gaze. Her expression was unreadable, calm but not emotionless. He could tell she'd practiced this moment in her mind. That only made his guilt heavier. "You weren't going to tell me, were you?" he asked, voice low, controlled. Elena's chin lifted. "I didn't know if I should." He didn't blame her. Not really. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks, she said quietly. "I confirmed it with the OB here. At first, I thought I'd handle it on my own. I've done most things in life solo. But then," she paused, "I kept thinking about that night. How you looked at me. How it didn't feel like a mistake. And I wondered if telling you would matter." He stepped closer, not to close the distance, but to make sure she could see the honesty in his eyes. "It matters, Elena." "I know that now," she said. "But I also know you. You're not built for this, for burp cloths and late-night feedings and a life that isn't curated to your calendar." "You think I can't be a father?" he asked. "I think you haven't decided yet whether you want to be." That stopped him, because it was true. Not because he didn't care, but because the kind of love he'd been raised on wasn't love. It was obligation, transaction, survival. Everything Elena was offering, truth, vulnerability, consequences, was love on a scale he'd never been taught to survive. "I don't have answers yet," he admitted, "but I'm not walking away." Her lips parted slightly, caught between relief and wariness. "I'm not expecting anything," she replied after a beat, "but you're in this now. Whether we fit or not, this baby is half yours." The distance between them held years of missteps, but the undercurrent had always been something else. Potential. Not the kind he could monetize, but the kind that scared him more. Emotional investment. A new wave of partygoers entered the ballroom, and Cameron glanced over his shoulder. A donor he'd been trying to land for months was standing just a few feet away, eyeing him. Margot was also nearby, brows furrowed, scanning Elena with the sharpness of a strategist sniffing out a PR liability. Cameron returned his gaze to Elena. "Can we get out of here?" he asked. "Somewhere quiet, just to talk." Elena hesitated. "There's a staff lounge down the hall. Lead the way." She hated the fact that part of her still fluttered when he followed her, like a shadow she hadn't fully shaken. As they moved down the back corridor of the hospital, Elena was acutely aware of every step. Not because she was afraid of being seen, but because what came next was unclear. She unlocked the door to the lounge. Dim lights, worn couch, the smell of old coffee filters. Not exactly glamorous, but it was private. She sat on the edge of the couch, resting her hands on her thighs, grounding herself. Cameron remained standing for a moment, then slowly lowered himself into the seat across from her. "Why didn't you call me?" he asked again, softer this time. Less accusation, more ache. "Because I didn't want you to feel obligated. I didn't want this to be another thing on your to-do list." Her voice cracked. "I don't need a savior. I just needed to breathe long enough to figure it out." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "You saved me once, remember?" She smiled faintly. "You saved yourself. I just pulled you out of the wreckage." "No," he said, voice firm. "You did more than that." Silence stretched between them. And then he asked the one question she hadn't prepared for. "What do you need from me?" Elena blinked, startled. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I think I need you to show up. Not just tonight. Not just for press. For real." "I want to," he said, and there was something in his tone, something raw. Elena searched his expression. "This doesn't have to be a relationship. I'm not asking for that. But what if I want one?" he said quietly. Her heart skipped. "This changes everything, Cameron. I know, and I'm terrified." He leaned forward. "But maybe it's the right kind of terrifying." She didn't answer. Not right away. But she didn't leave either. And for once, that was enough. 3 months earlier, she hadn't planned to stay. The gala had been long. Her heels pinched, her shoulders ached, and every charming conversation about radiology funding had bled her dry. All Elena had wanted was one glass of champagne on the rooftop before calling her rideshare and heading home. She hadn't planned for him to follow her up there. Cameron Blake, elusive, press-shy, always photographed but never caught in anything real. He'd been holding court downstairs with investors, but now, here he was, loose tie, drink in hand, wind in his hair like it was part of the skyline. "Elena," he said as he approached, surprising her. "You're avoiding the crowd too?" "Just wanted air," she replied, tucking a curl behind her ear. "Didn't expect you'd be one to disappear quietly." "Neither did I." His voice was soft, but sometimes the noise gets too loud. She tilted her head. "Even for billionaires?" "Especially for billionaires." He leaned against the railing beside her, both of them watching the city hum below. It was quieter up here, removed, elevated in every way. She glanced at him. "I saw your speech." "Yeah?" His smile was sheepish. "Too robotic?" "No, just rehearsed." He laughed under his breath. "That's fair." She studied him then, not the man on magazine covers, but this version, slightly undone, eyes tired, voice carrying the weight of someone used to being misunderstood. "You don't let many people in, do you?" She asked before she could stop herself. His gaze flicked to her, serious. "No, not really." Elena had expected deflection, maybe a charming quip. Not honesty. She looked away, heart tugging in an unfamiliar direction. "Me neither." Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that asked permission. And in the next moment, when Cameron stepped just a little closer, she didn't retreat. "Elena," he said, her name like something sacred. "If I kiss you right now, is that a mistake?" "Yes," she whispered, "but I still want you to." So he did. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't about conquest. It was something unspoken, an acknowledgement that they both felt too much, too quickly. When his hands gently framed her face, Elena leaned into him like she'd done it before. Like she already knew what it would be like to fall. The rooftop, the elevator, the suite he never mentioned by name. It blurred into hours of whispered questions, slow laughter, the brush of fingers like they were learning each other in a language built on breath. He'd touched her like she was a secret, not a souvenir. And then just before sunrise, she'd stirred to find him gone. No note, no number, just a cooled spot in the bed beside her, and silence. She didn't cry, but something inside her folded away, some delicate part of her that had hoped maybe he'd be different. Now he stared at her across the quiet staff lounge, the image of that night vivid in his mind. The feel of her skin, the way she'd made him laugh, really laugh, for the first time in months. And the truth was, he'd almost stayed. That morning, after watching her sleep, peaceful, curled against his chest, he'd stood in the bathroom for 10 minutes, phone in hand, after debating whether to cancel his flight, blow off Tokyo, just see where the morning might take them. But fear had been louder than instinct. Fear that he'd screw it up. Fear that he wasn't capable of showing up for someone in the real world the way he showed up in boardrooms. that he didn't know how to be loved without being needed for a headline or a pitch. And so he'd walked. Now, looking at her, pregnant with his child, eyes brimming with composure and quiet grief, he wanted to go back and punch the man he'd been. "I should have stayed," he said suddenly. Elena didn't look surprised, just tired. "But you didn't," she said, "and now we're here." He nodded. "I don't have an excuse. I thought leaving was protecting something. You, maybe, or myself." Her lips parted like she might argue, but she said nothing. "I didn't expect to feel what I felt with you. I didn't expect to want more, and when I did, it scared me." Elena exhaled, her eyes softer now. "It scared me too." There was something dangerously sincere about his voice. She wasn't prepared for it. Not from a man whose life was measured in mergers and IPOs. She stood, suddenly needing space. But Cameron followed, slowly, giving her time. Not demanding, just being there. "You don't owe me anything," she said again, quieter now. "Maybe not," he replied, "but I owe our child everything." That did something to her. It unraveled a knot she hadn't realized she'd tied in her chest. Her breath hitched. "Elena," he said gently, "I don't want to be the guy who walks again." She swallowed, eyes fixed on his. "Then don't be." And in that moment, quiet, raw, completely unscripted, they stopped dancing around the past. There were moments in Cameron's life when time seemed to collapse, when the world paused long enough for reality to crack open. Today was one of those days. Elena was pregnant, with his child, and for the first time in years, he didn't have a single answer. He sat in the back of his black SUV, engine humming low as the driver pulled away from the hospital. His phone buzzed on the seat beside him. Calendar notifications, emails, Margot's messages about prepping for the investor call tomorrow. A dozen things that mattered yesterday but felt like background noise now. He picked up the ultrasound photo she'd given him, still folded in his pocket. The image, barely more than a speck on the screen, had felt like an earthquake in his chest. It didn't make sense how something so small could change everything. He stared at it now, feeling the weight settle. Not panic, but gravity. Real. Permanent. His mind cataloged possibilities the way it always did. He could offer her a trust, a monthly stipend, a private health team, discreet housing if she wanted to keep out of the media. But every solution felt clinical, transactional, and none of it was what she'd asked for. What she'd said, show up not just tonight, not just for press, echoed like a promise he wasn't sure how to keep yet. But he could try. So he did the one thing that terrified him more than failure. He picked up the phone and called her. She wasn't expecting him to call that night. After their conversation, she'd gone home and fallen into bed exhausted, emotionally, physically, and in that deeply unfamiliar way that pregnancy amplified everything. The weight of possibility, the sting of memory, the nausea. But when her phone lit up at 9:41 p.m., showing Cameron Blake on the screen, her heart did something foolish. It skipped. She answered on the third ring. "Hi." "Hey," he said. His voice was quieter now, the arrogance stripped from it, just a man and his fear. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said quickly. "You didn't." A pause. Then, "Would you meet me for coffee tomorrow morning?" "Coffee? I want to talk, make things right, or start to." She hesitated, eyes drifting to the framed picture of her and her mother on the hallway wall. Ava would say no. Protect yourself. Don't get dragged into something built on guilt. But this wasn't about Ava, or even just her. It was about the baby, about giving the father a chance to show up. "Okay," she said softly. 1 hour. 1 hour, he agreed. He arrived early. Cameron chose a discreet cafe tucked between a bookstore and a florist, a place that didn't scream money but still made a solid cortado. He sat in the corner booth watching the door. Waiting was not something he was used to. He was used to people waiting on him, but for Elena, he would wait. When she walked in, denim jacket, ponytail, no makeup, he felt something catch in his chest. She looked tired, beautiful, real. "Hi," she said as she slid into the seat across from him. "Thanks for coming." She nodded. "You said you wanted to talk?" He took a breath. "I want to be involved in whatever way you'll let me." Elena's expression didn't shift. "Be specific." Cameron wasn't sure how to say the things he'd always outsourced to lawyers and assistants, so he tried something foreign. Honesty. "I don't have a blueprint for this, but I know I want to support you, not just financially. I want to be at the appointments, learn what I'm doing, even attend one of those parenting classes if that's what it takes." That made her blink. You? She said slowly, a little disbelieving. At a class with crying babies and yoga balls? He cracked a smile. I've survived a 2-hour board meeting on crypto insurance. I think I can handle a plastic doll. Her mouth twitched. So what, you want to co-parent? I want to try, he said. I can't promise perfection, Alina, but I won't vanish. Not again. She sat back, eyes narrowing in thought. What about your board, the press? Your image? He sighed. That's the problem, isn't it? Everything I've built, Aeon, my influence, it's balanced on perception. If this leaks, I could lose deals, investors, leverage. She nodded slowly, lips tightening. That's what I thought. But I'm not going to hide this, he added quickly. Not forever. I want us to control how it comes out. Not some tabloid, not Margot. Her eyes locked on his. So you're serious. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. Silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't avoidance. It was consideration. Finally, she said, okay, one step at a time. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I have my first parenting class Thursday night, she added. I'll be there. As they stood outside the cafe, the morning chill wrapping around them, she realized something unexpected. She believed him. Not completely. Not without caution. But the version of Cameron standing in front of her, the one asking, not dictating, wasn't the same man who'd vanished at sunrise. He wasn't just offering money. He was offering himself, and that was something worth watching. The boardroom was like a cathedral of control. 12 floors above Manhattan, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass and silence broken only by the hum of an air purifier, Cameron Blake sat at the head of the obsidian conference table. The walls gleamed. The view was perfect. And yet, he felt the pressure of a secret thrumming under his skin. His team moved through quarterly reports, revenue spikes, AI contracts, wearable prototypes. He nodded in the right places, said little, heard even less. Because beneath the surface of every chart, every market projection, one question kept looping. How do you protect a child from a world that weaponizes image? Cameron? Margot's voice snapped him back. His chief PR officer stood at the far end of the table in her signature navy sheath dress and an expression that could cut through reinforced glass. You haven't weighed in on the Zurich presentation, she said. Cameron cleared his throat. It's fine. Tighten the visuals on slide 6. Otherwise, greenlight it. Margot's gaze lingered on him a beat too long. After the meeting, she followed him back to his office like a shadow. You're distracted, she said flatly as soon as the glass door clicked shut. Just tired. No, she replied, crossing her arms. You're off. Cameron settled behind his desk, letting silence stretch a little too long before replying. What do you need, Margot? I need to know if something's coming I should be aware of. Press leaks, lawsuits, a merger you're not sharing yet? He almost laughed. The irony. What was coming wasn't a hostile takeover, it was a baby. No, he said carefully. Nothing you need to manage. Her lips pursed. She didn't believe him, not entirely. Because the last time you got like this, your ex sold your vacation photos to a gossip blog and cost us $500,000 in cleanup. He met her eyes, steel in his voice now. This is different. Margot raised a brow but backed off. Fine, but if it's going to affect how the board sees you, how the investors see you, I need warning. He didn't answer. She didn't push further. She simply turned and walked out, heels clicking like a metronome of judgment. Once alone, Cameron leaned back and stared at the skyline. From here, the city looked manageable, predictable. But fatherhood? That was chaos. No boardroom battle had ever felt this personal. He had always believed vulnerability was something to control, to use, or to bury. But last night, watching Elena slide the ultrasound across the table like it was nothing and everything had made something shift inside him. He had money, access, protection. But this wasn't about solving the baby. This was about becoming someone worth being trusted. He opened his laptop, pulled up his calendar, a dozen meetings, pitches, panels. Then at the very bottom, in a new color, Thursday, 6:30 p.m., prenatal class, Elm Street Clinic. He stared at the entry, smiled just a little, then shut the screen. Back at the hospital, Elena wiped down the ultrasound table between patients, glancing occasionally at her phone. No messages from Cameron, no updates. Good. It gave her time to breathe. Still, her mind wandered. She kept thinking about the way he'd said, I don't want to vanish. And more than the words, it was the way he'd looked, not polished or powerful, but uncertain, Human. She'd believed him. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to let him show up. "Elena," a voice said behind her. She turned to see Dr. Logan Hart leaning in the doorway, his white coat crisp, coffee in hand. "Busy day?" he asked. "Always." He stepped inside, eyes soft. "You doing okay?" Elena hesitated. "Define okay." Logan gave her a look. "I saw the news, heard whispers. Cameron Blake showing up in the building 2 days in a row? That's not subtle." She gave him a warning glance. "It's not a thing." "Isn't it? I'm pregnant," she said quietly. "And yes, it's his." Logan's expression shifted, something tight, unreadable. "And you're keeping it?" Elena raised a brow. "What kind of question is that?" "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "That came out wrong. I just meant you don't have to do it alone. Not with him. Or with me." She blinked. "You?" Logan's voice dropped. "You know how I feel. I've never said it because I figured you weren't ready to hear it, but I care about you. Always have." Her heart kicked hard, but not for the reason she wished it did. "Logan," she said gently, "you're a good man, but this isn't your story." He nodded once, the disappointment barely masked. "Just don't let him rewrite yours." "I won't," she whispered, but she wondered, was that what was already happening? By the time Thursday evening arrived, Cameron felt like he'd lived a year in 4 days. He parked his car outside the Elm Street clinic, his name deliberately left off the registration form. His security team wasn't thrilled, but he'd insisted. This wasn't a media appearance. It was personal. When he stepped inside, the scent of lavender and rubber gloves greeted him. The waiting room was modest, lined with posters of smiling babies and exhausted parents. He spotted Elena immediately. She looked up. Their eyes met. There was surprise there, but also something else, relief. "You came," she said, standing. "I said I would." She gave him a small smile. "I half expected a calendar conflict." "Not tonight," he said, offering his hand as they turned to the class door. "I made a promise." Cameron hadn't known what to expect. He'd faced hostile mergers, on-air interviews with global analysts, and testified before international regulatory panels, but nothing prepared him for the exam room at Riverside OB/GYN. The walls were painted a pale blue, meant to be calming. The vinyl chair beneath him creaked faintly. A soft beeping came from the nurse's station outside, but all he could hear was his own pulse pounding. Elena sat beside him on the exam table, a paper drape pulled over her thighs. Her hair was tied up, cheeks a little flushed. She looked both confident and uncertain, and far braver than he felt. "Thanks for coming," she said softly. "I said I would." "And you're still surprised you're here." He gave her a sideways look. "I'm surprised by a lot of things lately." She let out a breath that could have been a laugh or a sigh. The technician entered with a polite smile and nodded to Elena. "Ready for the ultrasound?" Elena nodded. "Yep." Cameron stood instinctively, stepping to the side. Not too close, not too far. He didn't know where he was supposed to be, so he simply stood still, watching as the gel was spread across Elena's abdomen, the wand placed gently. A moment passed. Then thump, 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 thump. The sound was fast, steady, unmistakable. Cameron froze. It was so small, so alive. "That's your baby's heartbeat," the technician said kindly. 8 weeks. Strong. Cameron's vision blurred just slightly. He blinked hard, not trusting his voice, not trusting the tightness rising in his chest. He'd seen his company's first product launch live on Wall Street. He'd watched satellites his team designed come online in real time over the Pacific. He'd closed billion-dollar deals with the world's top firms. And nothing had hit him like this. This wasn't data. This wasn't leverage. This was his child. The room dimmed around the edges. His knees bent slightly, like they needed to remember how to hold him up. Elena reached for his hand. He didn't realize he'd been shaking until her fingers wrapped around his. "You okay?" she whispered. He couldn't answer, so he squeezed her hand back. She'd told herself not to look at him during the ultrasound, told herself this was her moment, not his. But the second the sound filled the room, she'd turned her head, instinctive, needing to know what it meant to him. And she'd seen everything, the silence, the shock, the awe, and yes, the tears he wouldn't let fall. That was the moment she realized this was real for him too. He hadn't come because of obligation. He hadn't come to protect an image. He came because he wanted to. After the technician stepped out, leaving them alone, Elena wiped off the gel. The paper rustled as she moved. Cameron was still standing, still silent. "You don't have to say anything," she said gently. "It's a lot." He looked at her like she just named something sacred. "It's everything." She tucked her shirt back down and stood, walking over. For a moment, they just stood in the quiet, inches apart. "I've never heard anything like that before," he said. Elena nodded. "It doesn't sound like much, does it? Just a little rhythm." "No," Cameron said. "It sounds like hope." That caught her off guard. So did the way he looked at her next, not as a mistake he'd come back to fix, but as someone who was now central to his future. "Will you tell me what you need?" he asked softly. "Not just from me, but for this baby." She hesitated, then said, "Stability, honesty, no drama." His nod was immediate. "Done." "And patience," she added. His smile returned faintly. "That one might be harder, but I'll work on it." After they left the exam room, he walked her to her car. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the skyline, brushing her skin with gold. She leaned against her door, keys in hand. "This was a good day," she said, voice soft. He nodded. "It was. Thank you for showing up." He almost said always, but he wasn't ready to make that promise until he was sure he could keep it. Instead, he said, "I'll see you Thursday." Parenting class. Elena smirked. "Wear shoes you don't mind getting peed on." And for the first time in a very long time, Cameron laughed. Really laughed. It was the sound of something unfamiliar cracking open inside him. Not weakness, not fear. Something closer to joy. Margot Vance didn't knock. She never did. The moment Cameron stepped into his office Monday morning, she was already waiting, standing by the window, her arms crossed, lips set in a blade-sharp line. "Morning," he said warily. "Is it?" she replied without turning. "Because the blogs think otherwise." He froze mid-step. She turned now, holding a tablet. "Spotted billionaire Cameron Blake attending a community parenting class at Elm Street Clinic, then wearing, of all things, Nikes." He didn't blink. "It's a free country." "It's a fragile company," she snapped. "You've got a pending Series C, international licensing deals in negotiation, and a keynote in Singapore in 2 weeks. And now the whispers start. Is Blake distracted? Is Aeon exposed?" He crossed the room, calm but tight. "I'm not hiding from this." Her brows lifted, stunned. "So it's true?" Cameron didn't answer. He simply sat, unbuttoned his jacket, and met her gaze head on. "There's a woman," he said. "Her name is Elena Carter. She's pregnant with my child." Margot blinked, processing. "And you're keeping it?" His jaw tensed. "I'm not discussing this like a merger." She didn't sit. "You've worked years to craft an image. Control it. You drop this news the wrong way, and you risk everything we've built. Your board will panic. Investors will assume instability. They'll wonder if the next app feature gets delayed because you're changing diapers." "Then I'll show them they're wrong," he said, voice low. "I'm not choosing between being a CEO and a father." Margot's expression didn't soften. Public figures don't get the luxury of being human without consequence. He stood. "Maybe they should." That silenced her, briefly, but then she said, "Fine. You want to be a father? Be one. But if this leaks before we control the narrative, we won't just be doing damage control, we'll be fighting to survive it." Cameron moved past her toward the glass wall, staring out at the skyline. Somewhere out there was Elena, going to work, navigating this pregnancy without security teams and PR buffers. Just strength. He realized then, she didn't have armor. She had grace. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't need armor either. Elena leaned on the break room counter, stirring honey into her tea. She could feel the shift happening. Not in her body, although that too, but in the way people looked at her. A few nurses whispered more than usual. 2 residents exchanged knowing glances when she walked by. Rumors moved faster in hospitals than lab results. She'd heard the word Cameron more times than she could count in the last 24 hours. She wasn't ashamed of the pregnancy. She wasn't hiding. But the eyes were new, the assumptions, the pity, the envy. She didn't want to be Cameron Blake's scandal. She wanted to be Elena. A woman who happened to fall for someone once and ended up building a life out of it. A soft knock at the break room door broke her thoughts. It was Logan. "I brought you lunch," he said, holding a paper bag. "Figured you'd skip it again." She gave a soft smile. "Thanks." He handed it over, lingered. Then, quietly, "You okay?" She nodded, but not convincingly. "I keep thinking about what you said the other day," he went on, "that this isn't my story. It's not, but I care," he said simply. And if this gets hard, and it will, I'm here. No questions. No judgment. Elena's throat tightened. You've always been good. Not good enough, he said, then walked away. That night, Cameron sat at his desk long after everyone had left, lights low, his office glowing with the ambient hum of the city outside. He opened a new document, typed a headline, official statement draft, pending approval. Then he stared at the blinking cursor. This wasn't just about branding or headlines. It was about stepping out of the glass tower and into a world where feelings weren't a flaw. He typed. Cameron Blake is honored to share that he is expecting a child later this year. He will continue to lead Aeon Technologies with the same commitment and vision, now with a deeper personal purpose behind his mission to innovate in healthcare. He paused, reread, then hit delete. He wasn't ready. Not quite, but soon. And this time, when the world watched, he'd be standing beside Elena, not hiding. The coffee shop on Chestnut and 6th had always been her quiet place. It was tiny, just 4 tables, a window seat, and a barista who never judged how long you lingered. Elena had been coming here for years, sometimes with a book, sometimes just to sit with the noise of steaming milk and whispered conversations. Today, she came to meet the father of her unborn child. Cameron had suggested it. He'd said, someplace normal, no suits, just us. And he'd shown up on time, again. She watched him from the window as he approached. No blazer, no assistant, just a navy sweater, jeans, and a cautious smile. The man who had once looked sculpted by corner offices and curated interviews now looked like someone trying to live in his own skin. Hi, he said as he slid into the booth. You weren't kidding. This place is small. She shrugged. Some things are better when they don't try to be big. He nodded slowly. Touché. They ordered quietly, tea for her, coffee for him, and a slice of banana bread to share. When the server left, Elena said, Thanks for asking to meet here. I meant it, he replied. I wanted to see where you exist when no one's watching. She tilted her head. And what do you see? He gave a small, genuine smile. Something I didn't know I missed. She blinked. Missed? Cameron looked down at his hands. Peace, reality, a life that isn't strategy. There was a softness in his voice she wasn't used to, a thread of something deeper, maybe nostalgia, maybe grief. Elena sipped her tea. You could have had this after that night. He looked up, I know. She didn't ask why he'd left again. Not today. She didn't want to ruin the fragile quiet they'd built in this tiny booth, this accidental safe house from the world. So, she said instead, shifting the energy, you survived your first parenting class. I did, he said, mock serious. Barely. The doll peed on me. I think that was personal, she smiled. Get used to it. Cameron leaned in slightly, the smile lingering on his lips. I want to ask you something, and it's not business. Elena raised a brow. Okay. He took a breath. Can we do this more often? Coffee, classes, conversations that don't involve press or plans. Just being around each other. She hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because it was starting to feel dangerous. The way she liked the sound of his voice when it wasn't filtered for press, the way he looked at her like the world faded away when she spoke. I'm not ready for anything else, she said quietly. I need to protect myself. He nodded immediately. That's fair. I'm not asking for more. I'm just asking for now. And it was the way he said now, not yet, that made her heart relax just a little. He hadn't realized how starved he'd been for stillness until he sat across from her with no agenda. Just tea. Just time. In this booth, he wasn't the CEO. He wasn't the image. He was just Cameron. And she didn't seem to want anything from him except presence. Maybe that's why it was so hard to leave. After they finished the banana bread, Elena insisting on the corner with the crust, him pretending to protest, he walked her to her car. The city air was crisp, dusk just starting to dim the sky. I'll see you Thursday, she said as she clicked open her door. Cameron nodded. Text me if you need anything before then. She looked at him like she might say something more, but didn't. Instead, she stepped into the car and the moment folded quietly around them. As her taillights faded into traffic, Cameron felt it. Not loss, not regret. Hope. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. Later that night, Elena curled up on the couch, blanket over her legs, the ultrasound image resting on her stomach like a prayer. She wasn't naive. She knew life didn't hand you clean pages and fairy tales. But she also knew this. He'd shown up. And sometimes that was how a story began again. Some absences are louder than presence. It had been 4 days since their quiet coffee date, and Alina hadn't heard from Cameron. No texts, no check-ins, no reschedules, just silence. She told herself not to overthink it, told herself he was probably in a meeting or traveling, that billionaires didn't run on the same kind of time the rest of the world did. But the silence still pressed in, like fog creeping under the door. She sat in the sonography lab during her lunch break, a sandwich untouched beside her, watching the monitor flicker as static danced across the idle screen. She used to find comfort in the routine hum of machines. Now she kept wondering how something so mechanical could hold so much life. Her hand rested on her abdomen. It was still early, barely 2 months. She hadn't felt the baby move yet, but she felt everything else, the pull, the ache, the fear. Fear that Cameron's promises, his presence, his laughter, the near smile he'd worn when they shared banana bread, had been temporary, that his world would call him back, that she'd been foolish to believe he might stay this time. That goodbye was inevitable. Her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Her mom. Not Cameron. She didn't answer. Cameron stared at his calendar. The blocks of time bled into each other. Back-to-back pitch reviews, compliance calls with overseas partners, a surprise sit-down with the board to preempt investor unease. He'd been away in D.C. for 72 hours straight, and now, back in New York, he still felt like he was catching up with his own life. But through it all, one thread tugged at his mind like static under every thought. Elena. He hadn't reached out, not because he didn't want to, but embarrassingly, he didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being emotionally transparent. Vulnerability was an asset in negotiations, never in real life. And now when it mattered most, he found himself afraid. Afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of breaking the fragile bridge they'd started building. But mostly, afraid that he already had. He opened a new text message and stared at her name. "How are you feeling today?" He deleted it, too impersonal. "I've been thinking about you. About the baby." Too heavy. Finally, he typed, "I'm sorry for the silence. Things got loud again, but I haven't stopped thinking about you. Can we talk?" He hit send and waited. She saw the message come in while on the subway. The city blurred past the windows. Her heart did something strange, an ache wrapped in longing, laced with anger she didn't want to admit. She didn't reply right away, not because she wanted to punish him, but because she didn't know which version of herself he expected now. The forgiving one, the patient one, the woman who smiled through uncertainty. When she stepped off the train, she finally responded, "I'm still here, but I can't do maybe. I need to know if this matters to you outside of stolen hours." Her message hit him like a punch in the chest, because it was fair, and because it was true. He had been treating this, their connection, the pregnancy, her, like something he could step into and out of when the timing made sense. But Elena Carter wasn't a convenience. She was carrying his child, and maybe, just maybe, she was carrying his heart too. He picked up the phone. She answered on the third ring. "Hi," she said, more softly than she expected. "Hi," Cameron said, breathless like he'd been running. Not through streets, but through guilt. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. No excuses, no calendar talk, just, "I'm sorry I disappeared." "You didn't disappear," she replied. "You faded. There's a difference." The silence on the line was heavy. "I don't want to fade," he said finally, "but I'm learning I still wear a lot of armor. It's hard to take off." "Then don't take it off," she said gently. "Just let me see you through it." He paused, then exhaled. "Would you let me make it up to you?" "Dinner." She hesitated, then nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Yes," she said, "but you're bringing dessert." He laughed. "Deal." After she hung up, Elena stood on the sidewalk, the city rushing around her, heart finally slowing. Maybe he would disappoint her again. Maybe not. But for tonight, she wasn't chasing promises. She was allowing herself to believe in possibility. The lights in her apartment were soft, dimmed low enough that the quiet jazz playing from her speakers felt like a conversation instead of background noise. Cameron stood in her kitchen barefoot, jacket on the back of a chair, sleeves rolled up as he awkwardly attempted to open a plastic container of tiramisu from the overpriced dessert bar near his office. "Give me that," Elena laughed, taking it from his hands. "You're going to shred it like a quarterly report." I handle billion-dollar mergers, he muttered, but apparently cling wrap is my downfall. She handed him a spoon. Welcome to real life. They sat on the couch, barely 2 feet between them, the tiramisu on a plate between them. It wasn't a date, but it was something. And something, Elena was learning, could be more terrifying than nothing. So, she said, breaking the quiet, how was your day? And don't say busy. He leaned back, stretching one arm over the couch's backrest, casual but not territorial. It was manageable. I ignored 10 emails, told Margot to stand down and put your ultrasound photo on my desk, her hand stilled. You did? He nodded. It reminds me what's real. A beat of silence. Then, that scares you, doesn't it? She asked. Every hour, he admitted, but it also makes me want to be better. Elena turned her head to face him. Better at what? He looked at her like the answer was obvious. At showing up. At staying. Her heart squeezed. It would be easier to disbelieve him if he didn't keep saying things like, that. They ate in silence for a few moments, the music filling in the spaces they didn't need to rush. Then Cameron asked softly, did I really fade, or were you always expecting me to? The question caught her off guard. I think, she paused, choosing her words, I think I expected the past to repeat itself, because that's what people usually do. They repeat. And if I want to change that, she looked at him fully now, the room lit only by a single floor lamp and a flicker of candlelight from her windowsill. Then don't tell me, she said. Show me. He'd been powerful before. He'd been respected, feared, admired, but sitting in her apartment, wrapped in low light and honesty, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Safe. And that was the most dangerous feeling of all, because it made him want things he'd never let himself want. Things that weren't guaranteed, things that couldn't be bought. Elena was watching him carefully now, reading him like she'd learned to do in that quiet, focused way of hers. He cleared his throat. Do you ever think about that night? Her lips curved, barely. You mean the one where you snuck out before sunrise? Okay, he winced. I deserved that. I think about it, she admitted. Not because of what we did, but because of how it felt, like we didn't need words. I didn't leave because I didn't care, he said quickly. I left because I cared too much, and I didn't know what to do with that. She nodded. And now? He looked down, then back at her. Now I'm here, and I'm trying. A long, still moment passed. Then he reached out, not fast, not with assumption, just enough for his fingers to brush hers on the couch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let their hands rest side by side, the contact light, warm, real. No declarations, no sudden kisses, just presence. And for Cameron, that was more intimate than anything he'd known. They talked for another hour, voices low, topics meandering, what they'd wanted as kids, how their parents had shaped them, what they feared most about becoming parents themselves. And then, as the night curled into silence, she walked him to the door. He paused before stepping out, fingers lightly brushing the frame. Elena, he said, voice soft but steady, I don't want to keep being the man who walks away. She met his eyes, then don't. His hand came up, not to touch her, but to hover as if asking permission, and in the space between breath and heartbeat, she nodded. He leaned in, slow, and pressed the faintest kiss to her forehead. Not possessive, not performative, just a promise. Outside, the night was cool, the city buzzed low, but for once it didn't own him. As he walked toward his car, something inside him shifted. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a man standing at the edge of a life that terrified him and walking forward anyway. It started with a ping, a simple buzz from her phone as she stood in line at the hospital cafe, waiting for her usual chamomile tea and a croissant. Nothing unusual until she saw her friend Jenna's name flashing on her lock screen and the two words that followed, "Oh my God." She tapped it open. "Did you see page 6? Cameron? You, baby? What the hell?" Her stomach dropped. Tea forgotten, Alina turned on her heel and headed down the hallway, fingers trembling, as she pulled up the link Jenna had sent. There, in black and white, under a photo taken outside the Elm Street clinic, her and Cameron walking side by side, his hand grazing her lower back, was the headline. Tech Titan's secret, Cameron Blake expecting baby with hospital staffer? The article was brief but brutal. Unconfirmed reports place Cameron Blake at multiple prenatal appointments in recent weeks. Sources close to the billionaire suggest he's trying to keep the situation quiet. The identity of the woman remains unverified, but insiders say she works at a Manhattan medical facility. Elena's knees went soft. She leaned against the nearest wall, breath shallow. They hadn't named her yet, but it was only a matter of time. The photo alone was enough. The caption said unverified, but the way gossip spread online, she was a headline waiting to happen. Her phone buzzed again. Cameron. Calling. She stared at the screen for 1, 2, 3 rings before finally answering. Tell me you didn't know, she said, her voice sharp with fear. I didn't, he said immediately. I swear to you, Alina, I would never do this. Then how did they get the photo? A pause, a curse under his breath. I don't know, but I'll find out. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. Her chest tightened. They're going to figure out it's me. You know that, right? I work in a hospital, Cameron. I'm around patients, families. My name isn't protected like yours. I'll make calls, he said. We can kill the story. At least slow it down. My legal team. Your legal team? She snapped. This isn't just about you. I'm not some leak you need to plug. I'm the one carrying this baby. He went quiet. She regretted the words almost instantly, but not completely. Cameron, she said, softer now, this is what I was afraid of. This right here. I know, he said quietly, and I'm going to fix it. How? She whispered. I don't know yet, he said, but I will. He ended the call, throat tight, palms already sweating as he turned to face Margot, who was, of course, already waiting in the conference room. The screen behind her glowed with the same headline Elena had read minutes ago. Margot's arms were crossed, her eyes cool and unreadable. Well, she said, that didn't take long. Cameron didn't sit. This wasn't planned. Someone followed us. Margot tapped her pen on the table. You've been sloppy. I've been human, he corrected. She didn't flinch. You don't get to be both, not publicly. He resisted the urge to fire back. What he needed now wasn't more rage, it was damage control. How bad? He asked. If they confirm her identity, it'll trend globally by noon. We've already had 3 journalists call for comment. You want me to stonewall or spin? He paused. This was the moment. Hide or protect. Pretend or stand up. I want you to do nothing, he said firmly. Margot blinked. He met her eyes. No spin, no misdirection. If anyone asks, we say we don't comment on personal matters, but we don't lie. Margot raised a brow. So we wait for the wolves to rip the story open on their own? I'd rather let them snarl than be the one throwing Elena to them. For the first time, Margot didn't argue. She simply nodded. I'll prep legal for reactive statements, she said, and left the room. Cameron ran a hand through his hair, heart still hammering. He hadn't been afraid for himself. He'd been afraid for her, because Elena wasn't trained for this. She didn't have a publicist or a firewall of advisors. She had truth. Grace. A hospital job and a pregnancy that had already upended her quiet life. He opened his phone, texted her. I'm not hiding. I'm not letting them touch you. I'll protect you and the baby, no matter what it costs. The message came through as she sat in her car, still parked outside the hospital, engine off. She stared at the screen. Something in her chest cracked. She didn't know what scared her more, that he might be lying or that he might finally be telling the truth. The board didn't shout. They didn't have to. Their silence was a verdict in itself. Cameron sat at the long glass table, shoulders squared, hands steepled. Across from him sat 7 men and women, all of them seasoned investors, clinical thinkers, and emotionally neutral until now. Do you want to explain, began Miriam Kwan, one of Aon's most influential stakeholders, why the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company is suddenly trending on celebrity gossip blogs? Cameron didn't flinch. I'll spare you the guesswork, he said evenly. The article is true. I'm expecting a child. A ripple of discomfort moved across the room. And the mother? Asked another board member, Jonathan Bloom. Is she involved with the company? No, Cameron replied. She's a radiology technician at a hospital. We met long before this began. Is she aware of the media storm? Miriam asked. She's the one standing in the middle of it, Cameron said, without a publicist, without security. Margot stood in the corner, arms folded, saying nothing, for once. The board's expressions shifted. Cameron saw what they weren't saying. This wasn't part of the projection. This wasn't part of the plan. I understand this is personal, Miriam said, but perception matters. If the public sees this as a scandal, it's not a scandal, he said quietly, voice steady. It's a child, and I'm not going to treat my child or the woman carrying her as collateral damage. Silence, long, measured. Then Jonathan cleared his throat. We'll expect a statement by the end of the week, something non-invasive, reassuring to shareholders. Cameron nodded. You'll have it. Meeting adjourned. He stood and left the room without looking back, his jaw tight. This wasn't about spin anymore. It was about choosing who he was when the world stopped clapping. I'm sorry, Elena. I know this is uncomfortable. Her supervisor, Karen Wiles, sat across the small desk in the HR office, fingers laced, tone syrupy, sympathetic in the way only bureaucratic apologies could be. We've had some concerns from staff, Karen continued. They've seen the article, and while we absolutely respect your privacy, there's growing attention around your presence here. Elena raised a brow. You mean because I'm pregnant? Karen winced. Because of who you're pregnant with. Of course. Elena folded her hands calmly. I haven't spoken to any press. I haven't confirmed anything. I haven't broken any hospital policy. Karen nodded quickly. Yes, and we're not accusing you of anything. We just want to manage the optics. Elena inhaled slowly. I'm here to do my job. I've never made my personal life anyone's business. But if people are whispering, that's on them, not me. Karen offered a practiced smile. Understood. Just keep things quiet for now. Discreet. Elena stood. I was quiet before. That didn't stop anyone. She walked out with her head high, but inside her stomach coiled, because she wasn't just fighting for dignity anymore. She was fighting for the right to live a life she hadn't asked for, but had chosen anyway. And she wasn't sure which battle would be harder, keeping her job, or keeping her heart from breaking when Cameron's world inevitably pulled him away. By that night, Cameron stood outside her apartment building, 2 coffees in hand, a box of chocolate-glazed donuts under his arm. He wasn't trying to be cute. He was trying to show up. When Alina opened the door, he could tell she'd had a day. Her hair was up, loose strands falling. Her face was bare of makeup. But her eyes, those steady, clear eyes, were guarded. I brought sugar and caffeine, he said. She arched an eyebrow. Damage control? Redemption. He followed her inside, the space warm, quiet. Familiar now. She took a coffee, but not the donuts. I got pulled into HR today, she said. Not because I did anything wrong, but because someone else decided I'm now interesting. Cameron's chest tightened. Elena, I know it's not your fault, she said, cutting him off gently. But that doesn't change the outcome. My privacy's gone. My name's floating in whispers I can't shut down. I'll fix it, he said. She looked at him. You can't fix everything, not this. He stepped closer. Maybe not, but I can tell the truth, publicly, on the record. Her breath caught. You'd do that? I will, if it helps you, if it protects you, if it shows them all that this isn't shameful, it's real. She didn't answer at first, just looked at him like she was trying to read through the layers of who he still was and who he was trying to be. Okay, she said quietly, then I'll stand beside you when you do. Later that night, after he left, Alina sat by the window with her hands on her belly. The world was loud. But in this apartment, in this moment, she could still hear one truth clearly. He hadn't walked away. Not this time. The last person she expected to see at the hospital was Nate Harrington. He wore the same cocky half-smile that had once charmed her mother and irritated her friends, a button-down open at the collar, aviators hanging from the front like he'd stepped out of a casual law firm ad. He didn't belong here. Not anymore. Not in this part of her life. But there he was, leaning against the lobby information desk, as if summoned by the universe just to disrupt her fragile peace. Elena Carter, he drawled, standing straighter, still making Scrubs look like runway couture. Her stomach dropped, instinctively protective. She pulled her lab coat tighter. Nate, what are you doing here? I was in the neighborhood, he said casually. Saw the story, you and Cameron Blake, huh? That's one hell of a headline. Her blood chilled. I didn't ask to be in headlines. No, he said, stepping closer, but you sure know how to catch the right kind of attention these days. There it was, the edge, the old Nate, polished on the outside, possessive underneath. I don't have time for this, she said, turning toward the hallway. He followed. Come on, Elena, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to talk. You never just want to talk. He paused, sobering slightly. I heard you're pregnant. She stopped. I am, she said, and it's none of your business. Maybe not, he replied. But I was with you for 3 years. I think I earned the right to check in. You earned the right to be left in the past, she said, her voice low, steady. Nate looked at her, expression unreadable. Does he know what he's getting into? She bristled. He knows more than you ever did. And with that, she walked away, heart pounding, adrenaline shaking loose memories she'd buried years ago. The text from Elena came just after his meeting. I need a minute. Can we talk? Today? He didn't wait. He was in his car and outside her apartment within the hour. When she let him in, she looked rattled. Not broken, not angry, just like someone carrying something she didn't want to set down yet. He didn't ask. He waited. Elena sank into the couch. My ex showed up. Cameron's entire posture changed. Alert, tense. Nate? She nodded. He saw the article, thought that gave him permission to check in. Cameron sat beside her but kept a respectful distance. What did he say? That you should know what you're getting into, that this is too big for me, that it'll all collapse when the attention fades. A long silence. Then Cameron asked carefully, do you believe that? She didn't answer at first. Then, I don't know what to believe. My past doesn't exactly scream stable partner material, and your world, it runs on clean lines. Perfect optics. I'm not easy. Cameron turned to her, voice steady. Neither am I. She gave a small laugh. No, but you're powerful. You can protect your space. I'm still figuring out how to protect mine. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Elena, you're the strongest person I know. You think I don't see how you keep showing up every day in spite of the noise, the stares? You walk through all of it with your head high. She looked at him, eyes flickering with emotion. But what happens when the next thing hits? When someone else from my past shows up? When the press finds a detail to twist? He reached out, this time gently taking her hand. Then we face it, he said. Together. I'm not afraid of your past, and I'm not letting mine dictate our future. She didn't want to believe him just because the words sounded good. But the thing was, he didn't say them like a man performing. He said them like a man who'd seen his own flaws, lived with them, and still wanted to fight for something bigger, someone better. She squeezed his hand back. I can't promise I won't have doubts, she whispered. Then we'll deal with them one at a time, he said. They sat like that, quiet, still, connected, not because everything had been solved, but because they'd decided not to run from the hard parts. And in love, sometimes that was the most important decision of all. The OB's waiting room was warmer than usual. Elena sat in one of the corner chairs, a folder of test results tucked into her purse, one hand resting lightly on the curve of her belly. She wasn't showing much yet, but her body already felt different, tuned to a rhythm that no one else could hear. Cameron arrived 7 minutes early, as always. Wearing dark jeans and a tailored charcoal coat, he looked slightly out of place among the quiet chatter and laminated posters of fetal development, but when he spotted her, his entire demeanor shifted. Less CEO, more father. Hey, he said, sitting beside her. Sorry, Margot ambushed me about the Singapore deal before I could leave. She smiled, faintly. You made it. That's what matters. He nodded, exhaling. How are you feeling? Okay, she said, mostly tired. He gestured to the folder. Is that from today? She tensed slightly. Yeah, routine tests. His brow furrowed. Everything all right? Yes, she said. Well, mostly. One of the markers flagged slightly off. Nothing urgent. The doctor said we'll monitor. Immediately, Cameron straightened. What kind of marker? Blood sugar variation. Nothing serious. He didn't look convinced. But it could be serious? Elena's jaw tightened. I said it wasn't urgent. But shouldn't we get ahead of it? He asked. Hire a specialist. Look into dietary plans. Or get a second opinion. She turned fully now, eyes narrowing. Cameron, I've got this. I'm not trying to take over, he said defensively. I'm trying to be responsible. I know, she said, but sometimes responsibility looks a lot like control. He flinched. They sat in silence for a beat. The receptionist called another name. A mother with a toddler and a stroller shuffled past them. Elena softened. Look, I get it. You're used to solving things, fixing problems before they exist. That's how I survived, he admitted. I know, she said, but this, me the baby, it's not a system you can optimize. It's a life, and sometimes you just have to wait it out. He looked at her, quieter now. That terrifies me. Me too, she said, but you don't get to make all the decisions just because you have the resources. He sat back, digesting that. I want to protect both of you. Then trust me to know what I need, she said. He hated how helpless he felt. For most of his life, his value came from his ability to lead, to anticipate, to stay ahead of collapse. Now, he was staring down something he couldn't outmaneuver, couldn't fix. Elena didn't want solutions. She wanted partnership. That was newer, harder, but maybe more important than anything he'd ever built. He looked at her. No makeup, hair in a simple braid, eyes a little tired, but fierce. "You're right," he said finally. She blinked. "What?" "I need to back off. Learn when to ask, grow up, not decide." She raised an eyebrow. "Did Cameron Blake just admit he doesn't know everything?" "Don't quote me," he said, lips twitching. "I have a reputation to maintain." She smiled, then leaned her head gently against his shoulder. He didn't move. He just let her be there. Together, they sat in the quiet waiting room, not as a perfect couple, not as a solved equation, but as two people trying, failing, learning, and still showing up. Later that evening, Elena sent him a text. "Thank you for listening." His reply came seconds later. "Thank you for teaching me how." And for once, no part of her wondered if he meant it, because this time he didn't just hear her, he understood. "I did a thing. You may laugh. I deserve it." Attached image, a ridiculously sleek designer baby crib framed in LED lighting sitting alone in the middle of a glass-walled room. Alina laughed out loud in the break room, alone, with a mouthful of granola bar. She texted back, "Are you launching the baby into orbit or raising her?" It had 5-star reviews. "It looks like it costs more than my car." "Come over tonight and mock me in person?" She hesitated, but only briefly. "Fine, but I'm bringing tape so I can mark off a baby zone in that giant apartment of yours. As long as you bring snacks too. And opinions. I have no idea what I'm doing." She smiled. Neither did she. But maybe that's what made it honest. His apartment never felt more absurd than when Elena walked in. Floor-to-ceiling windows, imported fixtures, a couch the size of a small yacht. She looked around and then zeroed in on the crib in question. Gleaming white wood, curved edges, and a biometric sensor panel that looked like it belonged on a space shuttle. "This," she said, crouching beside it, "is not a crib. This is a Silicon Valley prototype." "It self-adjusts based on sleep cycles," Cameron offered, hands in pockets. "And probably syncs to a CIA server," she said, raising an eyebrow. "You can't just buy parenting, Cameron." "I wasn't trying to," he said. "I was trying to contribute." She turned then, noticing the unopened boxes behind him, a rocking chair, a changing table, a pack of onesies still folded like origami. "You bought all this?" He looked sheepish. "I had a few late-night scrolls and a credit card." Her heart pulled, not because it was extravagant, but because it was so deeply earnest. She walked over to the boxes, picked up a small stuffed elephant. "You're actually trying," she said quietly. "I'm not good at waiting," he admitted. "But building this stuff, it made it feel real." She looked at him, his tie undone, sleeves rolled up, a wrench sticking out of one of the boxes like he'd actually tried to assemble something himself. "Real doesn't mean perfect," she said. "Real just means present." He stepped closer. "Then help me make it real." They spent the next hour laughing over instruction manuals, arguing about whether the mobile should have pastel clouds or jungle animals, and discovering that Cameron, for all his wealth, had zero idea how to use a screwdriver without swearing. At one point, she caught him sitting cross-legged on the floor, struggling with a bassinet latch. "You know," she teased, "I've seen neurosurgeons do this faster. Pretty sure their patients didn't scream every 3 hours and poop in their hands." "You're not wrong." He looked up at her then, a smear of grease on his wrist, and something shifted. Warm, easy, familiar. This was home, in a way neither of them had planned. She handed him the final piece of the mobile, tiny silver stars, and helped clip them in place. When it spun, slow and crooked, they both leaned back on the floor and stared at it in silence. "It's not symmetrical," he said. "It's perfect," she replied. Later, as he walked her to the elevator, neither of them seemed eager to end the evening. "Thanks for not mocking me too hard," he said. "You're welcome," she said, smirking. "I'm saving it for labor." He laughed. Then, sobering slightly, "I know I have a lot to learn. We both do." The elevator arrived. She stepped inside, turned to face him. "Next time," she said, "we start with the rocking chair. Fewer parts, less danger to your pride. He smiled. Deal. As the doors slid closed, she gave him a look he'd remember for a long time, warm, trusting, hopeful. And when the silence returned, he sat back down on the nursery floor, surrounded by cardboard and bubble wrap, and whispered to no one, "I want this." Elena had just slipped out of radiology when she heard the familiar voice behind her. Leaving early, she turned to see Logan Hart, coffee in hand, jacket slung over his shoulder, easy grin in place. "Only by 10 minutes, she replied. "Dr. Parks owed me for covering her double last week." "Let me guess, you're heading home to assemble more baby furniture with Blake the builder?" She smiled, but it faltered slightly. There was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. "Actually, I'm heading home to nap. He's not around tonight." Logan fell into step beside her. "You okay?" "Mostly." She paused, hesitated. "Some days feel heavier than others. You don't have to carry it alone, you know." They walked together down the side corridor that led to the staff exit, quiet, semi-private, a familiar path they'd shared for years. He stopped, and so did she. "Elena," he said suddenly, "can I say something just once, and then I promise I'll let it go?" She blinked. "Okay. I care about you. More than I've let on, maybe more than I should." She froze. "I should have said it before," Logan continued, "before all this, but I didn't. And now, watching you with him, knowing how hard this has already been, I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." "Logan," she started, but he held up a hand. "I know, he's the father, and I'm not trying to make this harder, but I just needed you to know that someone's always seen you. Not because of a baby, not because of a headline, just you." Her heart ached, not because she was conflicted, but because Logan was good, safe, and undeserving of a heart that already belonged elsewhere. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I care about you, I do, but not like that." He nodded once, swallowed. "I figured, I just didn't want to wonder anymore." "I wish I'd known," she whispered. "I wish I'd told you sooner." They stood in the hallway, a silence stretching between the could-haves and the never-woulds, and then, behind them, a voice. What did I just walk into? He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He'd just arrived, box of pastries in one hand, checking if Elena was still on shift, but when he turned the corner and saw her with him, he stopped, and then he heard Logan's words. "I care about you, more than I've let on. Not because of a baby, just you." It hit Cameron in the chest. He knew about Logan, knew he worked here, had a history with her, but he hadn't realized how close that history still lived beneath the surface. And now, Logan was standing there, visibly flushed, eyes locking with his. Elena turned, startled. "Cameron," Logan squared his shoulders. "Guess we're skipping the awkward introductions." Cameron's tone was calm, but his jaw was tight. "Not necessary. I've seen your press mentions." Logan smiled. "You probably read better ones than mine." The tension was sharp, not loud, but unmistakably territorial. Elena stepped between them. "Stop." Both men froze. "Elena," Logan began, "I didn't mean..." "It doesn't matter what you meant," she cut in gently. "We're not doing this." She turned to Cameron. "Can we go?" He hesitated for a beat, then nodded. "Of course." As they walked down the hall, Elena silent beside him, Cameron spoke without looking at her. "Did you know he felt that way?" She paused. "Not until today. And I told him the truth." He didn't ask what the truth was, but when she slid her hand into his, as they stepped outside, she didn't have to. Later, back at her apartment, she sat across from Cameron on the couch. He hadn't said much since they left the hospital. "I meant what I told him," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. She watched him carefully. "You're quiet." He gave her a small, almost laugh. "I'm trying not to be irrationally jealous." She raised an eyebrow. "You can say jealous, Cameron. It's allowed." "I'm not used to it," he admitted. "Not the emotion, the stakes." She tilted her head. "And what are the stakes?" He looked at her like the answer should have been obvious. "You." He didn't like how raw it made him feel. Logan had a history with her, a kind of ease Cameron envied, but he had something else, something real, something now, and maybe that mattered more than what anyone else had been. "I'm not going to ask you to choose," he said finally. "You don't have to," she replied. "I already have." Her voice was soft, sure, no performance, no tension, and for the first time he realized it wasn't the baby that tied them. It was everything else they'd chosen since. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't let go. The wind was howling when she stepped outside. By the time she reached the end of the hospital parking garage, the sleet had turned to thick sheets of freezing rain, lashing sideways and coating every surface in glass. The city, usually so reliable, had shuttered early, train delays, closed bridges, and cabs nowhere in sight. She cursed softly, fumbling for her phone. Subways shut. Rideshare apps are frozen. You still in the city? The reply came instantly. Cameron, I'm on 63rd. I'll come get you. Don't move. She hesitated. The independent part of her, the one that had always insisted on solving things solo, told her to wait it out, find a solution. But the truth was, she was cold, exhausted, pregnant, and a little bit scared. So for once, she let someone show up for her. By the time he found her, she was standing beneath a narrow awning at the staff entrance, bundled in her coat, boots scuffed, cheeks pink from the cold. He rolled down the window. Get in. She didn't argue. The heat blasted as soon as the door shut. She exhaled slowly, the chill melting off her skin. I hate February, she muttered. I think February hates you back, he said with a grin, handing her a cup of something warm. Decaf chai. You looked like you needed it. She took it gratefully. You're learning. I'm trying. They drove in slow silence for a while, like the windshield wipers struggling against the ice. Manhattan looked like a snow globe caught in mid-shake, streetlights blurry, storefronts shuttered. Your place or mine? He asked. Elena glanced at him, amused. You said that like we're choosing a movie, he laughed. Mine's closer and has a generator. We might lose power tonight. Sold. The apartment was quiet, dim, safe. He handed her a blanket, set her wet boots near the radiator, and poured them both tea. By the time she curled up on his couch in one of his oversized sweatshirts, the storm outside was thick enough to blur the skyline into a haze of white. Looks like I'm stuck, she said. Cameron handed her a mug. You say that like it's a bad thing. She gave him a look. You sure you're okay hosting your own tabloid headline overnight? I'd rather be the headline than wonder if you got home safe. That shut her up. In the best way. They sipped tea for a while, the silence comfortable, broken only by the occasional pop of heating pipes and the wind clawing at the windows. This is nice, she said softly. He nodded. Yeah, it is. Then, slowly, I used to think silence was dangerous, that if it wasn't filled with movement or money, I'd fall behind, or worse, start feeling things I didn't know how to handle. She looked at him, and now, he met her eyes. Now I hope it never ends. He meant it. There was something sacred about the quiet between them tonight. No pretense, no public image, just a woman he couldn't stop thinking about, and the child she carried that had already changed everything. I never asked, he said after a beat. Do you want a girl or a boy? She smiled. Healthy. He laughed softly. You're better at this than I am. You're getting there. Really? She nodded. You've shown up more than I ever expected. He studied her face. I want to be there when the baby kicks for the first time, when you find out the sex, when she or he cries for the first time and I have no idea what to do. Elena blinked, her eyes suddenly glossy. You mean it? She whispered. Every word. There was a moment, long and still, where everything hovered on the edge of almost, and then she leaned forward slowly, her hand resting on his chest. You terrify me, she whispered. Because I'm still learning? He asked. No. Because I believe you. He reached up, cupping her cheek, thumb brushing along her jaw. Their lips met, soft, slow, not rushed, not possessive, just real. The kiss wasn't an answer. It was a promise. And in the cocoon of stormlight and silence, wrapped in the echo of two hearts choosing to stay, Elena let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this time wouldn't end in goodbye. He knew something was wrong the moment his phone buzzed 10 times in under a minute. Cameron sat in his office, coffee untouched, reviewing a product roadmap when Margot barged in, uninvited as usual, her expression unreadable, but her jaw clenched. Before you see it, she began. I didn't authorize it. See what? He asked, already scrolling. Her response wasn't verbal. She just turned her tablet toward him. There, on the front page of Celebrity Pulse, the most ruthless entertainment site in the country, was a photo. Cameron, Elena, in his apartment, last night. The image was zoomed in from a distance, grainy but unmistakable. Elena, barefoot in his sweatshirt, laughing. Cameron holding her hand, gazing at her. The headline read, Cameron Blake and secret girlfriend confirm relationship with cozy storm in romance. His stomach dropped. He'd been careful. There were no windows in the back living area, no media leaks, no open devices. The only way someone could have captured that moment was from inside. He looked up slowly. Who leaked this? Margot shook her head. I don't know yet. You always know. Her expression didn't budge. I'll find out. I've already sent a takedown request, but the photo's viral now. Every entertainment site has picked it up. Twitter's flooding. Cameron stood. Elena hasn't seen this. Margot's silence confirmed it. I need to warn her, he said, grabbing his coat. Margot stepped in his path. Cameron, if this came from internal sources, it means someone close did it, someone who had access. His eyes darkened. Then find out who, and make sure they never work for me again. The knock at her door was sharp, urgent. When she opened it, Cameron stood there, wind-blown, pale, eyes already apologizing. What happened? She asked, heart spiking. He stepped inside as that pulled out his phone and handed it to her. She stared. It took all of 3 seconds to feel the world tilt beneath her. The photo, the caption, the intimacy of the moment exposed, dissected, taken from her without permission. Elena sank into the couch. How did they even... I don't know, he said, crouching beside her, but it had to be someone inside. Maybe security, a service tech, someone who was in the apartment. She swallowed hard. Do you know what this means? I do. I work at a hospital. Patients trust me. If this story hits the wrong tone, if they paint me as opportunistic or say I leaked it, it could damage everything. Cameron took her hands. I'm going to fix it. She met his eyes. You keep saying that. But the deeper we go into your world, the less control I have over mine. His grip tightened slightly. Then let's stop reacting. Let's own it. Elena blinked. What? Let's take the story back, you and me, on our terms. Her heart hammered. Cameron, that's not a press strategy. That's our life. I know, he said, but I'd rather stand beside you in the storm than hide behind PR. He'd expected fear, anger, retreat. But Elena didn't yell. She didn't crumble. She stood, took a breath, and said, Then we do this once, together, clearly, and after that the world goes quiet again. Agreed? He nodded. Agreed? His phone buzzed. Margot, I found the leak. It was Marcus, one of your junior security advisors. He's already been escorted out. He sold the photo for 30 grand. Cameron felt a wave of fury, not at the money, not even at the photo, but at the violation. He looked back at Elena. She was still standing, still here, still with him. He reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't hesitate. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and sterilized ambition. Cameron sat at the end of the polished mahogany table, a document folder in front of him. His assistant had reviewed it. Margot had signed off. Even the family law consultant had assured him this was the cleanest option. A legally sound co-parenting agreement. Full financial coverage. Housing options. A non-disclosure clause. Mutual custody terms with built-in flexibility. It was efficient, practical, protective. It was everything he knew how to do. But when Elena arrived, quiet, guarded, uncertain, he realized how wrong this had all been, even before a single word left her lips. She sat across from him, looked at the folder, and then back at him. What's this? Cameron cleared his throat. It's not what it looks like. It's a contract. Just terms. For the baby. To make sure you're supported. That your rights are protected. That our roles are clear. She didn't touch the folder. She didn't even look down. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft. Controlled. Devastating. Are you asking me to sign our child into existence? Elena, no. You want me to put motherhood on paper to be a clause in your legacy? He stood, frustration bubbling under the surface. I'm trying to protect you, to protect us. This isn't a custody battle. It's structure. Her eyes flashed. It's control. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. No, she said, rising too. What's not fair is watching you promise one thing with your hands and take it back with your signature. He took a step closer. I didn't do this to push you away. I did it to keep you safe, to make sure no matter what happens, you'd still be in charge, she finished. The silence between them cracked like glass. He inhaled, slow and rough. Do you really think that's who I am? I think, she said, voice trembling now, that you're so scared of losing control that you'd rather script love than feel it. She didn't storm out. She didn't slam the folder or tear it in half. She simply looked at him like the man she'd almost let herself love had vanished in a boardroom full of shadows. I trusted you, she said, barely a whisper, not just to show up, but to mean it. And now, this contract, it's not love. It's a safety net for your guilt. Elena, I'm not a project, and this baby isn't a liability. He looked stunned, speechless, wounded. But she couldn't soften this time, because this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a revelation, and it hurt more than anything Nate or the press or even her own fear had ever done. She turned for the door, pausing only once. When you're ready to be more than a man managing a risk, she said, call me. And then she left. He stood in the echo of the silence she left behind. The contract sat untouched, the signature line blurred, and for the first time since his company's founding, Cameron Blake didn't feel powerful. He felt completely, utterly alone. She didn't cry right away, not on the subway ride home, not as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, but as soon as she closed the door, locked it, leaned against it, the tears came. Quiet, relentless, like something sacred had cracked open inside her. She made it to the couch before her knees gave out. The contract had been heavy in her hands, but what really broke her wasn't the paper. It was the truth buried underneath it. He still didn't trust love. Not enough to risk it without a signature. Not enough to let it live without structure. She pressed a hand to her belly, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The baby fluttered. Not quite a kick, not yet, but enough to remind her she wasn't alone. I'm still here, she whispered. I'm still yours. But God, she had wanted Cameron to be hers too. She had wanted him to fight differently. Instead, he'd offered legal protection in place of emotional protection. Coverage, but not connection. It would have been easier if he disappeared. But no, he was present. And he cared. He just didn't know how to love without holding a pen. And she deserved someone who knew how to hold her. Cameron. He didn't sleep. He didn't work. He sat on the floor of the nursery, surrounded by empty boxes and unused instructions, the contract still in his coat pocket like a weight he didn't know how to unload. The apartment felt wrong without her in it. He stared at the crib they'd built together, the lopsided mobile with its silver stars spinning gently in the draft from the window. She'd loved that mobile. She'd told him it didn't have to be perfect, it just had to be real. And what had he done? He'd handed her a document. Because when things got uncertain, he defaulted to what he knew: structure, logic, control. But love went a company, and Elena wasn't a shareholder. She was the first person who had ever seen him without the armor and asked him to stay anyway. And instead of staying, he'd built a wall. He buried his face in his hands, heart pounding. He was losing her. Not because she didn't love him, but because he didn't yet know how to let himself love her back in the way she needed. Days passed. Quiet, gray days full of hospital rounds, messages left unread, and her mother gently asking, "Is it worth giving up entirely?" Elena didn't know how to answer, because it wasn't a question of worth. It was a question of wholeness. She couldn't be half of something. Not again. Not with a child who deserved more. But her heart was stubborn. It still flickered when she saw his name on her screen, unread. It still whispered his voice in the mornings when she woke up alone. She hated that love could break and still be present, that endings didn't always come with absence, and that the person you missed the most could still exist in the same city and feel impossibly far away. He stood outside her building 3 times, never knocked, never called. Each time, he walked away because he didn't want to show up still wrong. He didn't want to hand her another version of himself she didn't ask for. But tonight, he lingered longer than before. Looked up at her window, imagined her in the warmth beyond the glass, and for the first time, instead of wondering what to fix, he asked himself something different. What am I afraid to feel? And the answer came, quiet, unflinching, that I'm enough only when I'm in control. And if I let go, I'll be left behind. He exhaled and left. But this time, he didn't leave empty-handed. He left ready. The car idled on the shoulder for a long time before he opened the door. Cold air hit him like a memory. The smell of pine, rain-soaked asphalt, and winter wind wrapped around his suit like a shroud. The same bend in the road. The same twisted guardrail. Even now, 3 years later, there were faint scorch marks on the pavement. The crash had almost killed him. No one had expected a rising tech CEO to be alone, driving himself through upstate New York during a late-season snow squall. No one had expected him to walk away. But he hadn't walked. He'd been pulled out by a stranger, by her. Cameron stepped past the rusted break in the railing, boots crunching softly in the wet gravel. The tree his car had hit was still there, scarred and darkened by the fire that had followed. The bark split in one jagged line, like the earth had opened and tried to rewrite him. He didn't come here often, but today it felt necessary. Because before Elena had carried his child, before she'd sat across from him in hospital lounges and cafe booths and parenting classes, before the press knew her name, she'd been a stranger who didn't look away. A woman who ran into fire, not from it. Back then, she hadn't even known who he was. All she'd seen was a crumpled luxury car, flames licking at the undercarriage, and a man slumped behind the wheel. She'd screamed for help, called 911, then thrown open the door herself when no one came fast enough. There was blood on his temple. His leg was pinned. He was unconscious, half-slumped, breath shallow. She didn't pause. She didn't wait. She dragged him out by his collar and jacket, her knees scraping on the gravel, sobbing from the cold and the fear and the effort. When the paramedics arrived, they had to pull her off him, her hands still gripping his shirt like letting go would undo what she'd done. Later they told her his name, that he was rich, important, a headline. But none of that had mattered then. And it didn't now. He crouched beside the tree now, pressing one gloved hand to the scarred bark. "I forgot," he whispered, "how fragile it all was." The wind didn't answer, but the silence held space for it. "You saved me," he said aloud, before I even knew what that meant. He took a breath, then another, then he stood. And this time, when he reached into his coat pocket, it wasn't for a phone or a contract. It was for the ultrasound photo he'd folded and carried every day since she gave it to him. He tucked it gently into the hollow of the tree, wedged between bark and memory, not as a symbol of loss, but as a starting line. "I don't want to be a man who manages love," he said aloud. "I want to be a man who earns it." The wind lifted just enough to move the leaves, and Cameron, for the first time in years, didn't feel like he had to hold the world together. He just had to hold on to what mattered. Back in the city, she stood in the nursery, quiet, uncertain. She hadn't texted him since she walked away. Part of her wanted to know if he missed her, but the bigger part wanted to know if he was willing to change. The contract hadn't broken them. What had broken them was the fear it revealed, but what could heal them was choice. As he drove back toward the city, the sun was starting to set behind a sheet of gray clouds. His hands were steady on the wheel. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't just going forward, he was going home. The email wasn't meant for her, not yet. It arrived in her inbox late in the evening from Margot's assistant of all people. A mistake, maybe, or maybe not. The subject line was simple, statement draft for review. But when she opened it, it wasn't press ready. It wasn't sanitized. It was raw, personal, and clearly never meant to see the light of day. Elena, I never learned how to say what matters without building a fortress around it. I wrote this a dozen ways before I gave up. But if you're reading this, I guess it means I couldn't stay silent anymore. You've seen the worst of me, my need to control everything, my fear of being chosen for the wrong reasons, the cold way I tried to protect you with a contract instead of a conversation. But I need you to know something. I was never trying to protect myself from you. I was trying to protect you from me, the part of me that breaks things when I don't understand them. I don't want to be a man who drafts safety. I want to be a man who builds trust. I miss you, not just as the mother of my child. I miss you as my friend, as the one person who made me believe I could be more than just a name on a magazine cover. If you ever decide to let me back in, I won't show up with contracts. I'll show up with presence. And this time, I won't leave until you tell me to. Always, see. Elena sat in stunned silence. She read it twice, then a third time. Each line unwound her defenses like thread pulled from the hem of something she hadn't realized was holding her together. He hadn't sent it, but he'd written it. And that mattered. Because words unsaid still had weight. Because a man who never showed vulnerability in boardrooms had sat somewhere alone and written this, not for publicity, but for her. He didn't know she'd read it, didn't even know if he'd hit save or just close the draft in frustration. But the words had been real. He'd typed them with his heart in his throat, the cursor blinking like a dare on the blank screen. And when he'd finished, he couldn't hit send. Not because he didn't mean it, but because he didn't believe he deserved a second chance to be heard. Now he sat in his office, watching the sun sink behind the skyline. If she never spoke to him again, he'd live with that. But if she did, he'd earn it. Later that night, she stood at the kitchen counter, phone in hand, thumb hovering over his name and her messages. She could call. She could wait. She could say nothing at all. But the words from the letter echoed. If you ever decide to let me back in. She typed, I read what you didn't send. A pause. You were right. About everything, especially about trust. I'm not promising anything, but maybe we start there. A beat. Then her screen lit up. I'll meet you wherever there is. And for the first time in days, her heart didn't ache. It unfolded. She hadn't planned to call him. Not until after the appointment. Not until she'd processed more. Not until she knew if her heart could bear another almost. But the baby had made the decision for her. It happened early that morning, while she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her teeth, half distracted by a podcast playing in the background. And then there it was. A flutter. No, stronger than that. A kick. Her first. Sharp. Sure. Undeniably real. She gasped, hand flying to her stomach, eyes wide in the mirror. Then, without thinking, she grabbed her phone. His phone lit up with her name at 7:16 a.m. He was mid-pour with his coffee, barely awake, but when he saw the name, he nearly dropped the mug. He answered before the second ring. Elena, her voice was breathless, joyful, something new in it, something free. She kicked. Cameron froze. What? She kicked Cameron this morning, for the first time. She laughed. I had to tell someone. I had to tell you. He sat down slowly, the room spinning slightly, not with panic, but with something much heavier. What did it feel like? He asked, voice quiet. Like a soft thump from the inside, like she was saying, hey, I'm here. He closed his eyes. I wish I could have been there. You still can be, she said gently. I have a follow-up this afternoon. Nothing serious, just a growth scan. A pause, then she added, you can come if you want. His reply was immediate. I want. The exam room was dim, cool, and quiet, like all the best moments of her pregnancy so far. Cameron sat beside her, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the monitor as the tech moved the wand gently across her stomach. There she is, the tech said, smiling. Strong little heartbeat. And she paused, then grinned. A little ninja. She's kicking up a storm in there. Cameron let out a shaky breath. Can I feel it? He asked. The tech smiled and gestured. If she's facing the right way, you might. Elena took his hand, placed it over the curve of her belly. Wait, she whispered, and then, like magic, a kick. Direct. Intentional. Cameron's entire body went still. His eyes filled, lips parting. She kicked me. Elena watched him, not the powerful man in the press, not the one who once pushed her away, but this Cameron, the one who was wide-eyed, humbled, moved. She knows your voice, Elena said softly. He turned to her, his hand still on her stomach. I don't know what I ever did to deserve this. You didn't have to earn her, she said. You just had to show up. He didn't want to move, didn't want the moment to end. The thump of their daughter's tiny foot against his hand had done something irreversible. It had made him a father. Not legally, not in theory, but in truth. When the appointment ended, they walked down the hall in silence. A silence that didn't ache anymore. It felt full. As they reached the elevator, Elena turned to him. You're different, she said. He nodded. I'm trying. No, she said. You are. He swallowed. Does that mean... She gave him a soft smile. It means maybe we start over. No contracts, no panic, just time. He stepped closer, eyes searching hers. And patience, he said. She nodded. And presence. He extended his hand like they were meeting for the first time. Elena Carter, I'd really like to take you to lunch. She laughed. Took his hand. You'd better drive. I'm growing your tiny kickboxer. They hadn't planned on spending the whole day together. Lunch turned into a walk through Central Park, bundled in scarves and laughter. The winter air was crisp but kind, the sun doing its best to stay present in the sky. It felt almost like something was blessing them, just this once. Afterward, when Cameron asked if she wanted to come see the nursery again, Elena hesitated only a moment before saying yes. Now they sat cross-legged on the nursery floor, a list of baby names between them and two half-empty mugs of peppermint tea growing cold on the windowsill. Cameron was focused, pen in hand, reading the names aloud like he was reviewing company departments. Aria? Too musical? He asked. Only if she comes out singing, Elena teased. He smiled. Okay, what about Sloane? Too severe. Sounds like she already owns 3 startup patents and ghosted her prom date. He laughed. Fair. She scanned the list again. What do you want her name to mean? She asked softly. He looked up, caught off guard by the question, but not unwilling to answer. I want her to feel strong when she says it, like it was built to carry weight, but soft enough that she knows it's okay to be gentle too. Elena nodded. I want her to feel like she belongs in her own story, not just someone else's legacy. That made him pause. You think I'll make her feel that way? I think, she said gently, you have the power to teach her that love isn't earned. It's given, if you let yourself. He looked down at the paper again. I don't want her to carry my name like a crown, he said. I want her to carry it like a hand she never has to let go of. He hadn't realized how much he cared about naming her until now. It wasn't just about syllables and meanings. It was about who she would become. What her name would whisper to the world before she ever spoke a word. He glanced over at Elena, her brow furrowed in concentration as she crossed off another name. Everly, she offered. Too trendy. Celeste? Too dramatic, Elena chuckled. Wow, you're hard to impress. So are you. She smiled, then suddenly stopped. Her pen hovered over a name. Did you say this one already? She asked. He leaned closer. On the list near the bottom, written in his handwriting from weeks ago, Maeve. He blinked. I forgot I wrote that down. I like it, Elena said softly. It's strong, clean, quiet. And Irish, he said. My mother's side. Her voice dipped. Did you love her? He nodded. I think so. She passed when I was 9, but I remember how she held my face when she said my name, like I was more than the legacy she married into. Elena touched his hand. Maeve, she said again, testing it. It feels like a beginning. He looked at her. You'd be okay with that? She smiled. I'd be honored. Later that night, as they stood by the crib, quiet, close, breathing in the fragile stillness of their near future, Cameron leaned in, brushed a kiss to her temple, and whispered, Hi, Maeve, it's your dad. And in that moment, Elena knew something she hadn't dared believe before. They weren't just preparing for a baby. They were building a life, together. He stood backstage at the Aon Summit, looking out at an audience of over 3,000 industry leaders, investors, media partners, and analysts. They buzzed beneath the glow of polished lights and billion-dollar anticipation. This was supposed to be the year's biggest product announcement, but Cameron Blake was about to give them something else entirely. Margot was pacing near the teleprompter, tablet in hand, eyes sharp. Stick to the script, she warned. Investors are watching. We've rebuilt confidence after the leak, and the board is stable. He gave a slow nod, but said nothing, because there would be no script. Not today. When the event producer signaled the countdown, Cameron stepped into the spotlight, not as the Cameron Blake who built Aon, but as the man who had been undone and remade by a woman and the daughter growing quietly in her womb. He took the podium. The applause came like waves. He let it pass, then spoke. 3 years ago, I nearly died in a car crash outside Albany. Most of you don't know that. It wasn't reported. My team buried it, branded it a minor incident, and kept the narrative on schedule. The room stilled. But I remember it, not because it shook my career, but because someone pulled me from that wreckage, a stranger who later became so much more. The silence turned into collective breath-holding. I built this company on control, he continued, on precision, performance, and protecting the story. But life doesn't operate like code, and love doesn't come with a manual. He stepped away from the mic. No teleprompter, no safety net. I'm expecting a daughter, a murmur. And the woman carrying her, he said, voice low but steady, is the bravest person I've ever known. He glanced off stage. Margot looked ready to faint. Cameras clicked in waves. I won't be stepping down, he added, sensing the board's fears before they spread. I will continue to lead Aon, but I will do so as a man who now understands that leadership without humanity is just ego dressed in strategy. He paused, then more quietly, she doesn't have my last name, yet. She doesn't have a press team or a platform. But she gave me a second chance, and not just the day she saved my life. Every day after. The applause this time came slow, tentative, then louder, real. Not polished, not perfect, but earned. And when he walked off stage, the first thing he did was call her. She'd watched it from her apartment, blanket over her legs, one hand on her stomach, the other gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles ached. And when he said the words, "I'm expecting a daughter. The woman carrying her is the bravest person I've ever known," something inside her cracked wide open. Not because it was public, not because it was bold, but because for once, Cameron Blake hadn't tried to fix the story. He'd told it. Unfiltered, uncurated, and he'd made space for her not as a footnote, but as his turning point. Her phone buzzed. She answered before the first ring finished. "Hi," she whispered. "I meant every word," he said, "and if it costs me every investor, every article, every inch of influence, I'd still choose it. Choose you." She closed her eyes. "I know." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything they hadn't said and everything they now could. He finally asked, gently, "Can I come over?" And this time she said, "Yes." He didn't bring gifts, no designer cribs, no PR-safe flowers, just himself. And when she opened the door, he didn't move. He just looked at her. No filters, no fear. "Elena," he said quietly, "I love you." She didn't gasp, didn't freeze. She just let the words wrap around her like warmth. "I know," she replied. "I've always known." Tears welled in his eyes. "You saved my life once, but you gave me a life I didn't even know I wanted." She touched his face. "You gave yourself that. I just reminded you it was allowed." He stepped inside, closed the door, and for the first time in months, maybe years, he wasn't carrying a legacy. He was walking into a future. It started with pressure, not pain, just a tightness, a quiet shift. She was standing in line at the pharmacy, phone in one hand, prenatal vitamins in the other, when something inside her body whispered, "Something's off." She pressed her hand to her lower stomach, tried to breathe. The baby hadn't moved since breakfast. Maybe she was imagining it. Maybe it was stress, or low blood sugar, or the cold front coming in. But something felt wrong. By the time she got back to the apartment, she wasn't wondering anymore. She was panicking. Not outwardly, her voice stayed even, her steps measured, but her hands were shaking when she dialed her OB's office. They told her to come in immediately. She grabbed her keys, Ben paused, and dialed one more number. He picked up on the first ring. "I need you," she said, breath short. "I think something's wrong with the baby." He didn't think. He moved. Dropped everything, his call with Aeon's legal team, his half-eaten lunch, his own fear. The only thing that mattered was her, and the tiny life they hadn't even met yet, but loved like she'd already arrived. He found Elena in the hospital parking lot, arms crossed over her belly, eyes dry but wild. He rushed to her side. "Talk to me." "She hasn't kicked all day," she said, "and I just feel tight, off. I'm probably overreacting, but..." "You're not," he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Let's go in." They moved together, not fast, but focused. The triage nurse brought them in immediately, sensing the energy between them wasn't panic. It was love sharpened by fear. The room was cold. She lay back on the exam table, paper crinkling beneath her. Cameron sat beside her, his fingers laced with hers. The nurse applied the gel, moving the Doppler across her stomach. Every second of silence felt like a lifetime. And then, thump, 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 thump! The sound burst through the quiet like a drumbeat of relief. "She's strong," the nurse said, smiling. "Heartbeat's normal. Looks like she's moved into a curled position and you just weren't feeling her as much." Elena let out a sob, not of pain but release. She covered her face with her free hand. Cameron stood and leaned in, kissing her temple, whispering, "She's okay. You're okay. We're okay." The nurse gave them a few minutes alone. Elena turned to him, eyes wet. "I was so scared. So was I. But you came," she said, her voice breaking. "No hesitation. You came." Cameron cupped her face. "There's nowhere else I could have been." She swallowed. "I felt it, you know. For a moment I thought, what if I lose her? What if I never get to see her grow?" He leaned in, forehead against hers. "Then I'd break, and I'd still stay. Whatever happens, I'm in this. Not as a figurehead, not as a father on paper, but as a man who loves you, and her." Elena gripped his hand tighter. "This baby has 2 heartbeats," she said. "Mine and yours. Even when I'm scared, I hear you." After the checkup, they didn't go straight home. They stopped at the park, no words, just hand in hand, walking slow past trees and snow-dusted benches. He looked at her, not as a woman on the edge of motherhood or a woman who'd once rescued him, but as his person, the one he'd been trying to find in spreadsheets, boardrooms, and power plays. "I want something different for her," he said suddenly. Elena looked up. "What do you mean?" "I don't want her to think love is performance or something you earn by staying composed. I want her to see us, messy, real, still choosing each other." Elena stopped walking. "You really love her already, don't you?" He smiled. "More than I've ever loved anything." She reached up, touched his cheek. "Then show her every day, even when she's screaming at 3 a.m. He took her hand again. "That's the plan." Later that night, wrapped in blankets, curled on the couch, she turned to him and whispered, "I was never afraid to be a mom." He looked at her. "What were you afraid of?" "Doing it alone." Cameron pulled her closer. "You never will be," he said. "Not again." The envelope arrived on a Thursday, tucked between a credit card bill and a coupon for organic baby wipes. Cream-colored, heavy paper, no return address, just her name, handwritten in soft gold ink. She opened it without thinking. "You're invited to celebrate the wedding of Jenna Collins and Dr. Logan Hart." The breath caught in her throat, not because she hadn't expected it, Jenna had mentioned the engagement months ago, but because she hadn't known it would be so soon. Or so close. Next weekend, just outside the city. Of course, she murmured, thumbing the embossed card. Of course Logan wouldn't avoid it, wouldn't hide the life he was building just because she'd chosen someone else. Still, it tugged at something quiet inside her. Not jealousy, not regret, just the reminder that people were building futures, declaring love in front of rooms full of witnesses, and she was still trying to figure out if she could trust that love didn't collapse when the lights went out. Later that night, when Cameron showed up with Thai food and a stack of baby books, she didn't tell him right away. Not until they were curled on the couch, her head on his chest, the baby pressing soft, rhythmic kicks into his palm. "Got a wedding invitation today," she said casually. He tensed slightly. "Oh?" "Jenna and Logan next weekend." A beat. Then, "Do you want to go?" "I don't know," she admitted. "It feels strange." "Strange how?" She lifted her head to look at him. "They're declaring something in front of everyone. No doubt. No edits." Cameron sat up straighter, his voice careful. "And that makes you question us?" "No," she said quickly. "Not us. Me." He tilted his head. "I think," she continued, "I'm scared to want more, to want the whole thing. Not just co-parenting, not just love behind closed doors, but a future. With a name, a ceremony, a promise someone keeps." Cameron didn't flinch. Instead, he took her hand. "Then let's go." She blinked. "What?" "To the wedding. Together. I'll hold your hand the entire time. You can decide if that kind of forever feels like something you want." Elena swallowed. "And if it does?" He squeezed her fingers gently. "Then I'll spend every day after that earning the right to ask you for it." The wedding was small, elegant, a snowy chapel in the Hudson Valley wrapped in twinkle lights and evergreens. They arrived hand in hand, quiet but present, not hiding. Elena wore a deep emerald wrap dress that made her eyes look even more sure than he remembered. Cameron kept glancing at her, not with nerves but with recognition, because there was something different in her today. She looked like someone ready to stop waiting. Logan saw them from across the aisle. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just offered a small, respectful nod. Cameron returned it. In another life, maybe that would have been a rivalry, but today it felt like clarity. Logan had his story. Cameron was writing his. When the bride walked down the aisle, Alina didn't look at her dress. She looked at Jenna's face, the way it softened and lit up all at once, the way Logan reached for her hand without hesitation. She leaned into Cameron's side and whispered, "That kind of love is terrifying." He kissed the top of her head, and worth every minute of fear. After the ceremony, they stayed at the reception just long enough for Alina to hug Jenna, to nod politely to Logan, to dance once, slow and unassuming, under a canopy of lights and quiet strings. As they stepped out into the snow, Cameron stopped walking. "What?" she asked, turning toward him. He pulled something small from his coat pocket. Not a ring, a ribbon, soft, pale gray, the kind you'd use to tie a name tag to a baby's bassinet. "I was going to wait," he said, "but I saw this in the hospital gift shop last week and it reminded me of you. She took it gently, fingers curling around the satin. It's not gold, it's not a proposal, but it's the beginning of a promise. She looked up at him, eyes full, voice steady. Then I'll tie it to the crib. Back at the apartment, she did just that. The ribbon looped gently around the corner of the mobile they'd built together, fluttering lightly every time the heat kicked on. A future didn't have to arrive all at once. Sometimes it began with one ribbon, one choice. And he knew, without question, he'd choose her again tomorrow, and every day after. The call came just after midnight. She'd just fallen asleep on the couch, a parenting book half open beside her, the baby pressing gently against her ribs. Cameron had left an hour earlier, kissing her forehead, promising he'd be back in the morning. Her phone buzzed once, then again. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something told her to pick up. She whispered a sleepy hello into the receiver. A pause. Then, Elena, it's Nate. Her heart stopped. She sat up straight. How did you get this number? I still had it from before, he said. I've been trying to reach you. Nate, I don't want. I'm not calling to argue, he said. I'm calling because I have something to say, and then I'll leave you alone. She stood, wrapped the throw blanket around her shoulders, walked into the kitchen. Make it fast. I saw the article. I saw the speech Blake gave, and he hesitated. I realized I owe you something. Elena said nothing. I wasn't a good partner, Nate continued. I didn't listen. I made everything about me, and I've spent a long time wondering why I let someone like you go. You didn't let me go, she said, voice tight. I walked. You did, he agreed, and I deserved it. She gripped the counter, the marble cold under her fingers. Why now? She asked. Why reach out? Because I thought I was angry at him. But the truth is, I was ashamed of how easily you moved on, of how fast someone else saw what I never could. You mean someone who stayed? He went quiet. I'm not looking for closure, she added. I already have it. Then maybe I just needed to hear you say that, Nate replied, so I could stop looking. She didn't respond, but she didn't hang up. I'm sorry, Elena, he said, for everything. He arrived the next morning with coffee, a pastry, and a quiet smile. I brought raspberry. You like that one, right? But as soon as he walked in, he saw her face, not broken, not afraid, just unsettled. He placed the cup on the table. What happened? Elena hesitated. Nate called. Cameron stilled. I didn't ask him to, she said. He said he just wanted to apologize. Did he? She nodded. Yeah, I think he meant it. Cameron crossed his arms, jaw tight. How did it make you feel? Surprisingly, not much. Mostly, it reminded me who I'm not anymore. He exhaled. I trust you. But if he ever crosses a line, he won't, she said firmly, because I won't let him. She stepped closer. But you need to know something. He looked at her, eyes cautious. I'm not afraid of my past, she said, but I don't want it following us into our future. Cameron nodded. Then let's draw the line now, together. Later that day, she found the courage to delete Nate's number for good. She didn't tell Cameron. She didn't need to, because this wasn't about revenge or insecurity or romantic theatrics. It was about clearing space for the baby, for the man who kept showing up, for herself. And when she lay in bed that night, her hand over the baby's kicks and Cameron reading beside her, she knew the future wouldn't always be easy, but this time it wouldn't be lonely. He'd spent the whole week trying to figure out the perfect way to do it. Should he take her to Paris? Rent out a restaurant? Arrange a string quartet on a rooftop? Margot had suggestions. His assistant had vendor lists. His board, despite themselves, even whispered congratulations preemptively. But none of that felt like them, because Elena Carter didn't want a spectacle. She wanted honesty. Time. Quiet. She wanted to believe. And he wasn't going to ruin that by turning love into a headline again. So he called in one favor. From the hospital. When she got the call from the head nurse, she thought something was wrong. Elena, we need you to come in. It's not an emergency, but it's special. Her heart lurched, but not with panic. There was something in the nurse's voice, a softness. So she came, just after sunset. The maternity wing was quiet, lights low, hallways hushed. And when she turned the corner into room 213, she stopped. There, standing beside an empty bassinet, dressed in a soft gray sweater, jeans, and an expression more open than she'd ever seen, was Cameron. No ring box, no speech, just him. and the walls she'd almost rebuilt around herself started to melt again. He took one step forward. "This was the room I visited on my first tour," he said. "When Aon launched its prenatal care division, I remember walking through here thinking, there's nothing efficient about this. It's messy, slow, uncontrolled." He met her eyes, and now I never want to leave it. She didn't speak, not because she didn't have words, but because something was rising in her chest, something that felt like stillness and motion all at once. Cameron reached into his coat pocket, not quickly, not nervously, just real. He pulled out a small velvet box, but didn't open it, not yet. "I bought this a month ago," he said, then almost threw it away after the contract disaster because I thought I had to fix everything before I deserved anything. She stepped closer. "I don't need a rescue," she said gently, "just a partner." "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm not asking to save you." Now he opened the box. Inside, a simple platinum ring, no headline diamond, just elegant, timeless, intentional. "I'm asking to stay, to raise Maeve with you, to carry the good days and the hard ones, to be more than my name and never less than the man who loves you." A pause. Then, quiet as breath. "Elena Carter, will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, time paused. And in that silence, every version of herself, the woman who once saved him in fire, the woman who walked away from a contract, the woman who'd cried over headlines, stood still, then smiled. "Cameron Blake," she said, her voice steady, eyes full. "Yes." She reached for him. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it wasn't a finish line. It was a door. They didn't kiss like movies. There were no violins, no flashbulbs, no applause, just a forehead pressed to his, a whisper. "We're really doing this." He closed his eyes, held her close. We already did. The contractions started at 3:42 a.m. She had just fallen asleep, curled against Cameron's chest, when the pressure gripped her lower spine like a wave breaking deep and low. She didn't panic. She breathed. Focused. She sat up, hand on her belly. Cameron stirred immediately. "Alina?" he asked, voice thick with sleep. She looked at him, smiled, even through the tension. "I think it's time." He was on his feet in 2 seconds. Fully awake, fully present. He helped her dress, grabbed the hospital bag, warmed her coat before they left. They moved together like a team, not rehearsed, but ready, because they'd been practicing this moment for months, not in classes, but in quiet conversations, compromises, late-night fears, early morning forgiveness, and love, so much love. They drove through a sleeping city, the streets slick with recent rain, traffic lights blinking lazily on near-empty intersections. Elena squeezed his hand as they pulled into the hospital. He kissed her knuckles. "I'm right here." She didn't need the reminder. She already knew. They were admitted immediately. The nurses, several of whom knew Elena, handled her with familiarity and kindness. But even in that familiarity, Cameron could see it. They looked at her with respect. Not because she was carrying the child of a billionaire, but because she was herself, a woman who knew her body, her mind, her strength. She labored for hours, breathing through waves of pain. Cameron never left her side. He held water bottles, pressed cool towels to her forehead, rubbed her back, and when the doctor said, "You're ready to push," he held her hand so tight she swore he'd never let go. It hurt. God, it hurt. But through the pain, she stayed focused on one thing, that heartbeat, her daughter. She pushed and cried and swore and pushed again. And then she was here, crying, beautiful, wrinkled, perfect. The nurse placed Maeve on her chest and Elena broke. Tears, laughter, everything at once. Cameron's hand was on her hair, his mouth on her temple, whispering over and over, "You did it. You did it." She looked up at him. "No, we did." When he held Maeve for the first time, everything else fell away. The companies, the investments, the legacy. In that moment, all he wanted to be, was hers. He cradled her gently, overwhelmed by how small and infinite she felt at once. "I'm your dad," he whispered, "and I swear I'll never stop showing up." Elena reached for him with her free hand. He sat beside her on the hospital bed, Maeve between them, their family. The next morning, the press somehow got the news. But this time it didn't matter. They didn't release a statement. They didn't correct headlines. They just stayed. In the room, in the moment. They held Maeve and held each other. And when a nurse brought in the final paperwork, Elena looked up at Cameron. "You sure about the name?" He smiled. Maeve Carter Blake, he said. She carries both of us. Alina signed. Cameron followed. And the name wasn't just a label, it was a promise. 6 weeks later, they took Maeve home to a nursery bathed in afternoon light, silver stars dangling from the crooked mobile they'd built together. A soft ribbon, the one Elena had tied there after the wedding, still fluttered gently when the window cracked open. Cameron stood at the doorway, watching Elena hum softly as she rocked Maeve. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to, because he finally understood something he hadn't before. Power fades, names change. But this everyday, quiet, breathtaking love, it's more than legacy. It's more than survival. It's more than his name.